Okay, now let me see.
We are live now. Hi, everybody. Welcome on in.
Hey.
Hey. We're just going to wait. It's just going to be a little delay, but it's on live now. Hi, everybody. Just welcoming everybody on in. Welcome to Beyond the Thread, Conversations in Context. We'll just wait for a few people to come on in, see who's here. Give it a second.
Okay, now I gotta find that.
Hi, Jamal. Hi, Darell.
Hello, Brian. Hello. How are you?
Jamal, you're giving us Art Deco, shadow on one side.
Shadow on one side. Well, because I still have natural daylight over there, and I'm giving light. I might move the light around depending on how I'm feeling in my activism state today. So just.
I see. Artists and activists. Today we are doing the arts of activism today. So as soon as we get some more people in here, we'll start talking about it.
Indeed.
Darell, how are you today in this pandemical time?
You know, these pandemical times have been good to me on today.
On today.
I am happy that Ruth is out and doing well. Mother Ginsburg is okay. She was released. I had pulled out my sackcloth and ash and I went in on Mother's behalf because if we could just, we just need Mother through this election.
Yes, we do. Oh.
I mean, we need her to be alive and well, but we do need her for this election.
Yeah. And Jamal, how are you doing? Yesterday was Jamal's birthday. Let's give a happy birthday to Jamal.
Yeah!
Thank you.
I looked really good in that birthday video, that montage. I looked fantastic.
Did you now? So what he's referring to, everyone?
I mean, it was one. I looked. Happy birthday.
Thank you so much. What he's referring to is Johan, Brian's husband, put together a little video for me for my birthday. And it was a throwback to a celebration of Brian's birthday at karaoke. And Darell is referring to how fantastic he looked in said video. That's what he's.
My vest was snatched. It was wonderful.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad that you feel all those things. It's great.
Well, I think we should jump right into it. I believe everybody will join us tonight, guys. We have a special show for everybody that's watching. Our dear friend Dionne Figgins is joining us later on today to talk about activism. She's a wonder, and we're going to let her introduce all the things that she is when she gets here. Can't wait for her to join us a little later on. Tonight, we're going to talk about the arts of activism. We want to really get into unpacking what it is to be an activist, what it is to be an artist. I know we've been talking about activism in this pandemical time, during this COVID time. We've been discussing it week in and week out, but it seems to be a topic that won't quite start. And I thought the best way to start talking about it is the three people that you have before us, myself, Brian Harlan Brooks, Darell J. Hunt, and Jamal Story, have always been in arts, the arts of activism, even when we're little wee ones, I think. I'll start with myself. When I started dancing, I couldn't stop moving, and the natural place to be as a young person in the tri-state area, meaning New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, was at Dance Theater of Harlem. Started training at Dance Theater of Harlem and then moved on to Alvin Ailey. Both of those organizations, at their root, are about the edification and betterment of the Black community through the arts. So from my inception of understanding, I always thought about the component of it being connected to who I am as a Black person and how we can uplift the community through that. And then the dance companies that I danced with afterwards, Philadelphia, Forces of Nature, Deeply Rooted Chicago Dance Theater, Donald Byrd, all of those, Donald Byrd, the group, were to make sure they gave back to the community from which they came. So teaching, choreography, lecture demonstrations were a main component of the work that we did in those companies. So it never dawned on me to separate my artistry from my quote unquote activism. As a young teen, I was very active and political. I live in Teaneck, New Jersey, and we have been protesting in different ways and being activists in different ways since I can remember. I came from a very active household in that aspect. But even as I started to become more of an artist, it was always an aspect of it. As we traveled the country or traveled the world, teaching and giving back to the communities that we were touching was a main component of what we were doing. When I was dancing with Philadelphia, we would always notice the grants that were given to Philadelphia versus Pennsylvania Ballet. And that would be a main contention point in the funding sources for Philadelphia, which is the Philadelphia Dance Company. And Jo Myers-Brown, one of her main components is to give back to the community at large. Many of these dance companies that we talked about that I was in, and even the other ones, Alvin Ailey, Dallas Black Dance Theater, Lulu Washington Dance Theater, Joseph Holmes Chicago Dance Theater, they all were rooted in community-centered work, where the work was of and for the people, inspired by Alvin Ailey, inspired by the Black Power movement, and inspired by the Civil Rights era. So you see all these companies starting to pop up in the 60s after Alvin's company or a little bit before, and they're all inspired and all want to give back to their communities. So it never dawned on me for my work to be anything other than that. So even when I moved on to being on Broadway and dealing with The Color Purple and dealing with Motown, the things that attracted me were things that spoke to me as an artist, yes. And they weren't always centered around Blackness in the work. But the companies that I spent the most time working with always had an inference to give back to the community that they are a part of and from. If you will, a friend of ours, Teresa Howard, she wrote an article a while back about how her experience at Dance Theater of Harlem was her personal Wakanda in a certain way. And I think the three of us have never centered whiteness at the pinnacle of our artistic or activist expression. And that is one of the things I wanted to bring up tonight as we go forward to talking about all those other organizations. Jamal, what was your experience like growing up as a young Black artist?
It was very, very similar to everything that you just described, actually. You mentioned Lulu Washington Dance Theater. That's where I began. And that company is this year celebrating its 40th anniversary. And what was compelling to me is that Lulu Washington was driven far more, and still is to this day, driven far more to tell stories, to deal with her community, what's going on in Los Angeles and in the real world of Los Angeles versus the Hollywoodized sort of version that gets the moniker of LA all the time. She was interested in choreographing pieces that reflect what's going on in society and in her community. So when I started dancing with her, I was dancing we were dancing things like What About Watts, which was about gang violence and about sort of the Crips versus Blood, binary there and all the things that went along with that.
Yeah, just to be clear, Jamal and I have known each other for a long time, and I saw Jamal and the costume was an overall, and Jamal, which if you believe it or not, was a THUG, a thug in the choreography.
Yeah.
Now that's an actor for you. So you know.
I was. Well, in Check This Out, which actually, in Check This Out, I think that was the costume for Check This Out, which is a piece that was based on the Rodney King beating and the widespread sort of municipal anger about it. The rage behind that was what that piece was about. And I think that's the one where I was I was a thug in that one. And I was the one walking to school when they, in a penché or in a tilt, when they were yelling things at me, like, what's up? I mean, it was the girls. It was all the girls. All the girls were thugs. And I was the kid going to school having to traverse both the blue side and the red side just to get there. And I think you saw that too. It was needless to say, very, very difficult, which is another hallmark of choreographers. I think that sort of works its way into it too. The idea that here are people who are armed with the artistry to represent these things on stage, and they're using our bodies to do this. And of course, some of the difficulty and some of the craft gets interspersed with whatever the creative artist is feeling. So some of that work was really, really, really hard, but then so were the circumstances, so were the things that we were portraying on stage, right? So it all kind of came together. And so here's a woman who had on the back of her license plate, the back tags was, "I am an artist and I vote." So
who is Lula Washington?
This is Lula Washington. So this is all I knew growing up in dance was these are the stories that we're going to tell. If this is what it is, you need to find your connection to that event. It wasn't just enough to sort of do the choreography. For us, it was a matter of the dancers. It was a matter of finding out where we were in that. And so the idea of civic responsibility through art was implemented early on by the people who trained, Lula Washington being one of those people, and several other Black choreographers and dance entities in Los Angeles. This is what it was all about at that time, especially the 90s. When I was coming of age, it was Rodney King, it was the Fires, it was O.J. Simpson. It was all of that. It was Soon Jadu, the murder of Latasha Harlan, in the grocery store in the kind of what would be a bodega here in New York back in the 90s. So we were exploring all of those things. All of those things got to be a part of the art. And when I had my first solo for AXO NAACP competition, I don't know how many of you guys know about that, but I really hope it's thriving now. But the NAACP AXO competition, when I auditioned for that, I was doing a piece that about the same thing, about being a Black youth in America. I wrote the text for it, I choreographed the piece, and Lula was going, yep, that's what you got to do. You got to do all the things. You got to do it. You got to do it. You have to produce it, and you have to tell the story, and you have to be in the narrative, and you have to put on the baseball cap, and you have to do this. That's all part of your responsibility as an artist.
Absolutely. And just to go back to the competition, the AXO NAACP Awards, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, that was the kinds of organizations that were always connected to the work we were doing. And so in our aspects as dancers and as young artists, those were things that were just part of what it is that we did. Darell, what about your experience? You're a little different. You're not a dancer in the same way that we are, although I've seen you dance and cut a rug, and I've put you through a couple moves myself. But tell us your experience.
I started out as a singer with my family and in church. So for me, I didn't have a reference to hearing other people. On the radio, yes, but in my life from Monday to Sunday, it was the people in my church, the people in my family that liked to blues, as to R&B, funk, and stuff like that. My activism came through high school. So elementary school, I was singing. My first chorus class was 5th grade. Then I got to middle school, and because all of my schools have been Black, all of my art has been Black centered. So in middle school, I was singing in chorus class one day, and Laura Hodge, rest in peace, she called me after class. She said, "Come here, Hunt." Back in the day, teachers of a certain age, they addressed you by your last name. So a lot of times it was just Hunt, Jenkins, Williams. And so she called me around the piano, and she said, "I hear your voice, over the other young men." She said, "That's fantastic, but we have to work on blending." She said,
that's how Kira got her start too, by the way. She wasn't able to blend.
She said, where did you start singing? I said, with my family. And for the majority, because I wasn't singing as a little boy, like out like that in church yet at like 8 years old. We had a little youth group or whatever, but I said I sing with my family around the house, in the car. And she said, "So that's what developed your ear?" I said, "Yes." My family would tell me, like, specifically one of my aunts, she would say, "Okay, I'm going to sing this note, and you need to try and hear and find the note above or below it." So that's where my ear development first started. And singing in church, where there was no sheet music. You learned everything by rote. They plunked it out on the piano or the organ or whatever, and you had to pick it up. And she started asking me, as I was singing on the bench, she said, "Do you understand anything that's going on this piece of paper, the sheet music?" I said, "I read the words like I read the hymnal at church." And so she started tapping out notes, half notes. She started teaching me the science and all that of theory. And the music that we sing was Black music. I was not introduced to Mozart. I was not introduced to all the classical people until I got into high school. And even then, their work was not positioned above ours. And in my neighborhood, there were always things going on in the community. I was singing at the community center for an event or for a rally or something that was going on. I would be down at Windsor Center, being like taking in what was going on. Then the Greensboro Cultural Arts Center, they had a big February celebration, like Black History Month, stuff like that. So that's when I started seeing, really like in high school, like, oh, I can use my voice and the sounds that I make to stand up for things that aren't right, to encourage people in our community. As far as art and structured art and singing, when I was in high school, my professor would always tell us that our voice, the Black voice, is the most capable, because our voices are found in like all of the genres. He said there is something to be said about the fact that we had Leontine Price, we had Jesse Norman, we had Marian Anderson, but we also had B.B. King, and we had Aretha, and all these people. So he would, we mainly sang the work of Black composers. My favorite was Moses Hogan. He would make sure that we understood our sound and how specific it was. He would play vocal ensembles or choral ensembles that were Black, then he would play them that were white, and then he would play the ones that were mixed. And after a certain amount of time listening to that, we could tell that's a Black choir. They're white. They're maybe that. So I was always fine-tuned to understand that my art was great and nobody's art was better than my individual art. Not that I was better on a different, but nothing is better than what I have to give to the world as a human being. So in performing and singing throughout the city, we sang African chants, we sang the music of the civil rights movement, but we also learned Latin phonetics, German, Spanish, French, Italian. We knew all of that, but we were never ever taught that that was bigger than us. Even going through college, when we did my degree is in acting, but when we had,
What college did you go to, Darell?
I attended and graduated from the illustrious North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University in Greensboro, North Carolina.
What's the regular name? What do we hear most often without the agricultural and technical? What do we say with that in the Black community? A&T.
A&T.
Right.
If you can tell the Black people that aren't really aware because they say AT&T, and I'd be like, no, baby, that's the phone company.
Yes,
and so within the curriculum at the illustrious in the theater department, we studied the African-American experience within theater. Main stage shows were Black playwrights for the majority. 85% of the shows, main stage, were Black playwrights. In the classroom and studio and stuff like that, we did the Ibsens, we did the Chekhovs, we visited Cushman, we did that. But specifically, we were taught that we had a responsibility to use the talents and the crafts that we were developing to stand up for what's right. Literally, it was like the pedagogy is literally the hook or crook that Nina Simone talked about in her work, how she wanted to teach Black people how amazing, how powerful they are. So as I trained throughout life and learned theater, further music and stuff like that, all of my work has been really centered in the African experience, the diaspora, all of that. I mean, a mix of everything. Taking Dunham class and learning how Katherine Dunham was an activist. I learned during the riots in St. Louis, she went out into the city and pulled some of the young men in that were rioting and angry, and she pulled them in and she introduced them to dance, and some of them ended up being in her company, as the story goes. So all of my development as an artist, singer, a theater practitioner, it's really been through the aesthetic and the love and appreciation of Blackness.
Absolutely, Darell. And I think what we're getting at with all three of us is that, you know, doing the work, we were not separated from the work and the arts and the activism of the Black people that were great in Black activism and Black community. I was so privileged, and Jamal was so privileged, and Darell was so privileged to work with some great Black artists who are also Black activists. I took class directly from classman Dunham. We all touched fingers or closeness to Tally Beatty, who was a mainstay choreographer in the Black dance community, who was also in the movie Stormy Weather. And then we also have Alvin Ailey's works, and we have George Faison's work, who choreographed The Wiz on Broadway, and we have Lewis Johnson's work, who choreographed The Wiz in the film. we have the work of these people, and Joffrey Holder, who choreographed and staged a lot of the work in Dance Theater of Harlem, and worked with Dionne, who's going to be coming on later. All of those people saw the work that they were doing, and I know this from their own words, as them bringing for the edification of Black people and Blackness to make the world better through the edification of the arts, without ever having their eye, as we knew it, on white institutions or white organizations to edify us or to bring us forward. We were making our statements full, and what the ask was to be treated equally with opportunity to generational wealth and generational sustainability, which has never really been afforded any company really other than Alvin Ailey. I don't think any other Black dance company that is led by that has a Black dance core and has a Black person as its leader has had the ability to have access to sustainable wealth as a organization. Every company that I have come from still works twice as hard as their white companies to maintain their financial windfall and to keep dancers employed, taken care of, giving them health insurance, taking care of who we are as people in humanity. Yet the work that they do still stays rooted in the community. No matter how much money Joe Myers Brown has or Lula Washington has, we are going to do lecture demonstrations. We are going to. Go ahead, Jamal.
No, I was that part is prescient to me because, of course, you know, you mentioned Nina Simone, Darell. It's like she said, you don't have a choice. You have to do it. It's the artist's duty, as far as she was concerned, to do exactly this. And it's not always easy, particularly when you're learning in the formative years, and this is a part of it, to sort of do all of the things that Brian is describing. I mean, I remember we did a piece on Harriet Tubman. It was an evening length ballet, and Lula wanted to she had us in the clothing of the era. She wanted to represent that experience as completely as she could, and in a very literal way. So there was a moment where I was chained, and I was coming in during the auction, auction promenade. I was kind of, struggling across the stage in a dance belt. And I remember being for all of those of you guys who don't know, a dance belt is basically just, it's just the underwear. It's a thong, the thong. It has no coverage. So I'm in a dance belt, and I'm going across the stage in the chain, and it wasn't acting. It was, no, we're going to put you in this in such a way that you would be in it, and you need to, go across. This is an auction. And those are not easy moments, especially when you're young and you don't actually understand the gravity. I mean, I had a clue. I was 16, but the idea is that I didn't understand that this was going to be my life in dance, that the activism part was going to be, sort of part and parcel to the development of work, of the creative output. I didn't know that at the time.
Indeed. And Darell, you say?
One thing that I would also like to mention, the people that do the work like us, they do it throughout life. Like, they don't sit down at 45. Mm-hmm. They don't sit down at 50. The North Carolina Black Repertory Company, up until I think maybe a few years ago, was led by I met her, I think my freshman year at A&T. I auditioned for something that North Carolina Black Rep was doing, and just finding out who she was a dancer her entire life. She was Lewis Johnson's assistant choreographer of The Wiz, the film. If you've ever watched it, she's the lady on top of the piano going at it in the gold pants. She's also the lady who's holding Toto when Diana falls into the sandbox in the city. And she would literally, of age, still working, still sharp. She had a theater group in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, for young teenage actors. One of them is now in the BFA program at UNC Greensboro. Another young man, his name is, we call him JJ Jeter. He is currently in Hamilton, well, once things get back up and going. But she would be up early in the morning, I mean, in her 60s, going to teach children the craft of dance, getting them into theater, learning monologues. And everything that they talked about had to do with Black excellence we're not begging for rights anymore. We're here. We're going to demand the things. So a lot of people don't always connect with it, that they think because someone is not on a billboard, because they're not on television, or because they're not a household name, they think that they just faded away somewhere. All of these people that we've been talking about thus far, they have given their lives to the craft, to justice, and they just keep doing it because it's so in their bones.
Absolutely. And I mean, the dances that we did, when I danced with Deeply Rooted, there was a dance called Dedication, and we did a dance called Olawa, and I was a child of the New World, and it was dedicated to the Atlanta child murders and the children at that time period. I did a dance by Milton Myers that was called Men Against the Wall, and it's about the oppression of Blackness behind that. So a lot of those, the work that we did, the vision, as far as I was concerned as a young person, was always to do work, become great, and then create it for the next generation. The idea of moving forward and upward was not as much as moving inward, and as you accrued things that were external, pulling them inward to you and making the world better through that lens. That being said, I want to move a little forward to the activism portion of it. And we find ourselves now in an era in theater where we have multiple initiatives that have come forward to call out Black Broadway theater and to call out theater institutions. It's happening in Hollywood, it's happening on Broadway, it's happening in every institution. And to be quite frank, it's also happening inside of corporations. So corporations, big business, NASCAR, the NFL, I mean, some of them are doing things nobody asked for. I mean, nobody asked for the Black national anthem in the NFL. This is not what we were asking for. We talked about this last week, but you know, a little bit of that performative activism when we know that the NFL still has deep connections to the Donald Trump administration and is still giving money to them. So painting it, telling us that you're going to sing our national anthem, which we didn't ask for.
We didn't.
No, but that wasn't, the ask was please stop killing Black people disproportionately at the police. That was and still is the ask and demand. The demand is not that you placate us with songs that you have never heard of to sing to your audience to make us feel what? The kneeling was really not ever even about the national anthem, to be perfectly honest. Just like, as I've said multiple times, the taking down of the statues is not about the statues. The national anthem, the statues, all these things have sat up. Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben have all set up without us bothering with them for years because we understand the deeper issue is further than that. But pulling it back to us, we have some things that have been on the table in our direct community, in the Broadway musical theater community that are out now. We have Dear White American Theater, We See You. That's one dossier that went out. Every aspect of it, I have to say, I agree with in terms of how they're calling out white theater owners and how people have been discriminated against within our theater community. We have Black Theater United, who is also a group of Black artists who have come together to unite to support generationally people that are coming up and being able to have a group of people that come together that create regulations and ideals about that. We also have Tanya Pinkin, who just said she's tired of performative activism from white and Black people. Those are all different perspectives within them. And you know, there's a kitchen conversation I think that is going to have to be had amongst Black people that won't be televised, where we discuss what all of our initiative is, not in an effort for us to become a monolith, because there are multiple ways to screw in a light bulb, and there are multiple ways to get what we want done. And I think it's going to take multiple lenses.
Yes, it will.
It's going to take all of the people pushing in the same direction from their own perspective. So I would never deign to criticize in any way any of the organizations that are coming up, other than to make other than for our own betterment. Tanya Pinker's perspective is that she is tired of performative activism from Black and white people. That's her, some of the perspective in her dossier. If you haven't seen it, it's really worth the read. It's a very good read. Black Theater United has a great ask. We see you, white. What is it? White theater, white.
We see you. I can't remember the name of that one. I just know the acronym.
Theater.
We See You, White American Theater.
Right, and you can go to any of their websites. and look at Black Theater United, you can go WeSeeYou, whiteamericantheater.com. It's WeSeeYou.com, and you can read these dossiers for yourself, because they all have different perspectives and different nuances and different demands about trying to approach the idea of white theater. I think what struck me from the beginning of the movement, we started, I think there were a lot of people who made personal statements, and those personal statements became larger than the individual. Griffin Matthews made a statement about his experience working with Witness Uganda, and his experience with his producer, his director. And there's been some discussion about whether those things can be considered racist, whether he experienced those things. He likened it to the experience of an Amy Cooper. And for myself, honestly, I have had some critique of that idea that those of us that are in Black theater are in the same position as somebody who is actually at risk from somebody in our death and life being taken by a police officer or by a false arrest. I do think there's a discrepancy between the two, and I think it's important that as we laid out the three of us laid out our experiences as young Black people, I always considered it to be a place of privilege and luck that I was able to be a dancer. So my expectation, and anything that I've gone through as a dancer and as a Black man in dance, yes, there's been difficulty. Yes, there's been racism. And for the record, I think every single Black person on the planet has experienced racism, whether they know it or not. And I'm including Clarence Thomas and Candace Owens, people that I cannot stand.
Being called.
Right, but whether they know it or not, they've experienced anti-Black racism as well. And anybody who wants to participate in lifting the voice of Black people after experiencing anti-Black racism is welcome to the table. I'm just not sure that all the people that jump to the front are all the people that should be. That again, nitpick, and that's a nuance that I don't know.
It's a nuance. And that's basically to your point, it becomes about sort of how all of the things dovetail into this roster of perspectives on how to deal with the thing. And I've always been a fan, in as much as I with you, Brian, have critiques of various portions of these things that have been published and these moments that have shown up on the thread, as it were. But what is definitely exciting to me is the idea that it pushes forward the truth that we are not sort of homogenized in our thinking as Black artists any more than we're homogenized in our thinking as Black people about anything, and so the idea that it's ironically Griffin Matthews, you mentioned, he's now on Dear White People, the television show. And one of the things I love about Dear White People is that it right off the bat, first or second episode, I can't remember which one, you get to see this Black residence hall and watch all of these very, very, very intelligent Black students with vastly diverging perspectives on how to deal with white supremacy, and it shows up in how they sort of go about their lives on campus. So I do like that aspect of what's going on now in the theater community, in the Black theater community, that everyone's going about it with their convictions about what it ought to be, and there is some disagreement. There's some definite disharmony about it. I think that the danger is it becomes about those nuances and the degree to which this is no longer just a kitchen conversation, and then it becomes sort of a thread conversation. That's where I get nervous.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the Go ahead, Darell.
For me, I thought he was gonna say Laurel. For me, it is what I like is that people are understanding, as we've said, the requirement of the nuanced conversation. There is no one answer for the racism, discrimination, mistreatment, harassment. There's no one answer. People have to talk regionally. People have to talk nationally. People have to talk within organizations. So there's no one specific conversation. What I love about it with WeSeeYou, White American Theater, other organizations, what I like about it is, a part of it is a bit unfortunate, but what I like about it is the people who have not had our experience coming up as Black artists, understanding the value of Black art, Black people and people of color that have been taught that Eurocentric art ideology is the way to go, people that like from a theater perspective, I've been told by many Black people that because I don't do Shakespeare, that I don't have a full grasp on theater and storytelling. What has happened is those types of people have been made to deal with it. They have been the hammer hit the nail on the head. They have felt the ouch. They have felt the discrimination that they missed because they had certain proximity, because they had certain privilege, and because they had a different lived experience. And for me, I was on a Zoom call last week, and we were talking about just what's going on in America for Black people. And it was Black and white folk, different Latino backgrounds. And someone positioned a question, and that question, even though we were glad to do it, it was a safe environment. The question caused us to educate this white male on what he could and could not pay attention to moving forward, or what he should or shouldn't pay attention to moving forward. And we had to educate him on issues. He was basically saying, well, I don't see people crying out in this area, in that area. And, you know, we're focusing on this big national media situation, but I don't see people in what had recently happened in Atlanta and in Chicago with all the shootings and stuff. We told him those things were going on. If you're in the know, you know how to access them, you know how to support them. And I said that if you have the general historic information about the oppression of a people, you can move and run faster within groups of people. We don't have to slow down and teach you, well, Plessy versus Ferguson, if you already know that. And I'm not shaming or bashing anyone for not knowing anything. I'm just saying that now people are having to sit down and have conversations and approach this thing from a place of history, not from a place of feelings. Well, I didn't feel bad at the field when I worked there. Well, didn't nobody treat me bad when I was on that gig? But people around you are saying this has happened X amount of times in different ways. So I'm loving, out of all of this disarray, I'm loving that people who have been overlooking certain things, they're being made to deal with the bull.
Absolutely. And I think we're going to move on to bring our guest on. I'm really excited about Dionne coming on. But what I think is very interesting in the moment is that there are multiple organizations that have come forward. And the one thing that I think Tanya Pinkins asks in her statement is, where has everybody been? And I think she asked that of Black people and white people. And I think what we've come to in this conversation that we had thus far is that we were privileged as young people to be in the environments we were, so we were put there. So many people goes back to the national interest in the arts and who gets to access the arts. The reason these Black organizations that take care of the arts in organizations where they're in areas where they're not funded very well is because it gives people like young Black kids an access to that work and access to that legacy and then access to their history. When you do grow up in an environment where you don't get to learn about all the Black artists that came before you, you're going to center whiteness, just like if you're an American who has an unlearned white supremacy or patriarchy or homophobia, you're going to be patriarchal, white supremacist, and homophobic. You have to unlearn that, and it takes a constant unraveling. And what I'm most excited about at this moment is that people who were taught, because listen, when I was in Motown, when I was in Color Purple, there were people that are in some of these organizations, when I would see them in the halls at Ripley Greer, where you would smell sweat and fear and stress, and they would say, I would say, oh, are you coming in to audition for Motown? They would be like, oh no, I'm not auditioning for that. And these were Black people. Or they would say to me, oh, no, I'm not coming in for the Color Purple. And no matter what you do as a Black person, the respectability politics within the art, no matter how close your fifth position is as a ballet dancer, no matter how high your note is as a legit theater singer, you cannot negate the scourge of white supremacy and oppression. And I think this moment has made that clear to everyone. With that being said, I want to bring on someone who's been in the work for a very long time. Her name is Dionne Figgins. She's a star of stage and screen and the dance floor and everywhere else. She has an organization she's a co-founder and director of programming for Broadway Serves, and she's a dear friend of all of ours. Jamal, you got for Dionne?
Here we go. Come
on, Dionne.
She's coming. she's coming, and she's here. Dionne Figgins.
What's up, bro?
Hell. Don't. Hey guys.
What's up, bro?
Hey. Can I just say too that I want to just say really quickly, we talked about AXO earlier. She posted in there that she did AXO too, that she wants second place at AXO. It's a thing. Listen,
That's right.
It was a thing.
That's right. We support it. We support all of Black.
So Dionne, you come from where and how did you get to here?
So I am from Washington, D.C. I trained at the illustrious Jones Haywood School of Ballet under the direction of Doris Jones. Sandra Fortune Green was also one of my instructors. I also worked with Dance Institute of Washington. I was one of the founding members of Dance Institute of Washington under the leadership of Fabian Barnes, who was a member of Dance Theater of Harlem at the time. And I went to college in Baltimore briefly because, you know, I ended up at Dance Theater of Harlem, dancing under the direction of Arthur Mitchell. I was a part of the final company under the direction of Arthur Mitchell. And after the company folded, took a little hiatus around 2004, and that's when I started to explore the musical theater Broadway scene, and I got into my first Broadway show, Hot Feet, under the direction of Maurice Hines in 2006. And so that was the beginning of my Broadway journey. Yep, that's how I got here.
And Dionne, as a Black woman and as a Black ballet dancer, what was it like connecting those two moments? Where as a Black person and doing classical ballet, what was that like as a young Black woman?
Well, it didn't dawn on me that there was anything unique about me as a Black dancer in ballet until I was almost an adult. Going to college, because all of my instructors were Black. I'm being trained by dancers who have danced at Dance Theater of Harlem. My instructor, Sandra Fortune Green, she was one of the first Americans and the first Black at the Second International Black Competition in Moscow. Hinton Battle came through my school, Cheetah Rivera came through the school, Louis Armstrong, Renee Robinson. So being a Black in ballet was normal. So it wasn't until I got to college that I was in the minority. Up until then, all of my experiences were with other Black people and being trained by Black people. So Black excellence was normal. There was nothing unique about it. I mean, even the experiences that I had in the summertime, I trained at Rosella Hightower in France when I was 12. And there were 16 of us. It wasn't like I went by myself. There were 16 Black students going to France to train. And before we even got there, Miss Jones was like, listen, she set us down like Black Mama style. She was like, listen, we're going over here. We're not gonna have any of these antics. You know, you're gonna be on your best behavior. We are representing Black excellence. So let's get it together. And we just knew, and even when we got there, we knew that we were different, but we were also trained and we were talented. And so in our mind, it's like, this is normal. This is just what it is. So it wasn't until I got to college that I was like, that I hit the, you're here because you're Black. You got this scholarship because you're Black. That had never dawned on me until I was 18. So, you know, go ahead.
How did that wonderful experience, I keep calling it the Wakanda experience, because I think that experience, it's what I also see. I don't know if you've ever experienced with Black Muslim children who go to Black Muslim schools as young people, even if they don't, the way that they think about their ability to do whatever they like to do is very different than us that are Black Christian or just Black American people who go into a situation and have the understanding of themselves as less than. It changes the way you're able to go into different situations. And how did that kind of Wakandanization, I wrote it down, somebody.
Not Wakanda. Yes! Wow. We have a running dictionary of words we make up that's going in it.
How did that work for you? How did that stay in you as you made this transition to Broadway? And how did that affect you?
I think it just gave me a certain level of confidence, you know, like that was unshakable in my blackness. Like I never felt like I needed to apologize for my person. You know, it put me in a position where when I was in rooms and I was confronted with microaggressions, I was able, much like Tanya Pinkins was speaking about in her article, I've always been able to attack those things head on because I've always known that those things are not true. I've always known that any angry Black woman or, you know, any of you're being sensitive, I always knew that those were silencing tactics because I come from a space where my opinion matters. My thoughts and are valuable. My body is valuable. There's value in me just as a human being. And I never felt like when I stepped into those spaces, I needed to apologize for how brazenly Black I was, because in the spaces that I grew up, that those things were celebrated. Like when I got to Dance Theater of Harlem and we're learning return and I'm auditioning for the company and I'm being taught return, the fact that I know how to do all the Black steps and also know how to dance on point, this is being celebrated. And so when I got into, honestly, when I first went to my first couple of auditions for Broadway shows, I had to leave because I was shocked at how the lack of integration in the room. Like I was literally like, oh my God, there are no Black people here. And somehow in my mind, I had become accustomed to that in white spaces, you know, in ballet. I was like, I knew that there weren't gonna be any Black people there. So I was ready, you know, like I come in and I have my head up and I'm like, I know it's not gonna be any Black people here, so I'm here to represent. But when I came to Broadway and there were no Black people in the first like 4 auditions I went to, I had to leave because I had to get my mind around the fact that I'm trying to enter into a new profession and there are no people in the room that look like me. And that's the reason why I didn't try to go to another ballet company. This is the very reason why I didn't transition from Dance Theater of Harlem to trying to go to a white company, because I didn't want to have the experience of being the minority in the room after I had experienced the glory of having my Blackness celebrated on a regular basis.
I think, and you said something very interesting in there when you were discussing how you made the transition and there was never a thought of less than or insecurity of yours as you're coming to these spaces. It was, oh, I have something to offer these spaces. I'm coming in here as me and here we go. And then so how did that affect, I know the answer to this, but I want you to tell everybody listening, how did that affect your expectations of Broadway? Did you have any expectations of Broadway taking care of you as a Black woman?
No, I mean, this was never my plan. Like, honestly, if Dance Theater of Harlem had not folded, I wouldn't have left, because I'm getting an opportunity to do rep that most, you know, brown people, Black people are not getting the opportunity to do, and also being able to do it in my Black body, you know, and having that be celebrated. And so I had no expectation. First of all, I'm talented, you know, like that's just what it is. Like, so I wasn't about to allow a new space to try to convince me that that wasn't true, you know? And like, even coming to the space and having people tell me you have to act like you don't know as much, you have to, you know, put on this like bubbly brown thing, that I had never needed to do that. It was just, am I talented? So am I good enough for this job or not? And now I'm being told that the way I look, the way I wear my hair, the way I talk, all these things are all of a sudden being policed. And I was like, well, this means that I can only put myself into certain rooms because I'm not about to do that. And so what my career has been about is finding rooms where my Blackness is not going to be policed, where my person is valued, where my Black experience, I can bring that to the forefront. And I've actually said no to the spaces that don't offer me that, because in my experience, it's not good enough and it doesn't compare to the experiences that I'd had previously, where I'm being celebrated just for being me and being authentic in myself.
And I want to things in there that you said, because some people would ask, when we want to leave a space, like if we say our Black Wakandanization, why did we leave that? I think that's a question that even comes up in my head. Like, why did we leave that? We left that because of the lack of access to generational wealth. Had those organizations been able to have generational wealth, there would have been no reason to leave. Those organizations did not have the access to the generational wealth that sustained us as we grew older. Although Joe Myers Brown, Arthur Mitchell, Lula Washington, Lewis Johnson, Tally Biddy would have loved to have us stay there. As you grew older, we went out because we were like, let's create some wealth for ourselves, because I can't afford to live like that. And I know as a young person, I'm sure if Joe Myers Brown was to hear me, she would hear me saying, oh, well, we left because you didn't pay enough money. And as a 24-year-old, and the infinite wisdom of somebody 24-year-old, I thought that was true. Oh, I'm not making no money. I got to make some money. But I never thought I want to leave here because I want to be somewhere where I'm more validated.
Never. No, that's not it.
And I never needed white people to validate me. Like that literally has never occurred to me, because I have solely been in spaces of Black excellence where I've been validated. And so that's been my training. And I know when I stand in the room, like, because I have a critical eye, I can stand in these rooms and I can look and see around the room, these people are not better than me. So, you know, so I've been in the fortunate position where I've never doubted that, but I've also had to realize that everybody in this, especially in the Broadway community, hasn't had that experience. There are a lot of people who have been the only Black people in their experience from the time that they're young. And so now what we're seeing with this movement, a lot of the people that are at the forefront of this movement are just now starting to express their Black identity in this way. You know, they're just now coming to the realization, like, oh my God, all these years I've been marginalized. I need to speak out. When there are when other of us are just like, oh, you just got here. Okay, cool. Let me help you out.
One of the things that Shelly Williams said that I thought was, when she made her first post, which I thought was really poignant, she took full accountability for where she was in accepting it. She said, I code switched to your detriment. And I thought that was such a poignant that she said. Because when we code switch, we do that because we think we're protecting our career, which is what Shelly also says in her death. She said, I thought I was protecting my career, and now I need to protect my breath. I need to breathe.
Right.
And
go ahead.
For me, I was taught that in college, that I was taught that there will be a time where you will have to endure some things so that you can get a job and buy a loaf of bread. So what they did in my department was they made sure that we had a skill set or skill sets outside of performing, even within the arts, so that we could work and stay within the arts and earn a living, so that we would not have to be bound to a contract that left us unhappy, that placed us in rooms, like you said, Dionne, where people didn't value you, they wanted to make you feel a certain way. I learned in my early years of training, the pitch is either centered or it isn't. I don't care whose throat it's singing from. The pitch it's at the center or it isn't. Whatever the genre, if it's opera, if it's rock, if it's folk, if it's gospel. So I have always been trained through the work. And in college, I say this all the time, in college, I realized, I was like, the only celebrity is the discipline. The only famous thing is, because I don't care how good you are today, I don't care how many awards you have today, if you were a dancer, you started with tendu, you started with parallel. If you're a singer, you started with matching pitch. If you're a musician, you start with the only star and the only celebrity is the discipline. And
well, Darell, wait, I'll stop you right there at that, because that right there is what I think all of us here were taught in our youngness. It's like I walked into dance and they were like, okay, you're all beautiful. We love you, babies. You're great. You're all pretty. And that's about the last time we're going to tell you that.
Yes.
And from that point on, it was about learning and working. And I think that for our white brothers and sisters, I think what becomes problematic is that the industry in and of itself is so ruthless, right? So I know
before you even get to race, before you even get to that part, when you're just dealing with the actual industry, ruthless is about right.
Because I think what we all had the benefit of is coming from the art first.
Yeah.
Business second. So it was easy for us, easy is a strong word, but it was easier to navigate the rigors of a commodified art form versus the truth of the art. So I think all of us have expressed in this moment that as we got forward to being in corporate art, we could see the corporation of it and let go of it being something that was necessarily going to feed us. Because I know that as much as Black women are treated terribly on Broadway, I know that white women, the way that they talk about their looks, their bodies, is just it's terrible. And I know that those things really are built into the industry. And then you're going to put
and in Hollywood.
And in the whole art,
thing, the whole entertainment industry. And that was, you know, like that was something that definitely coming into Broadway that I've had to, like, as I'm in the audition room more, because when you're at Dance Theater of Harlem, you're not in the audition room. You audition and then you just, you know, dance, and then choreographers show up to class and they're like her, and then you just dance and you just dance and you dance. But here it's like, I have to be mindful every time I go into the room, what kind of Black they're hoping to cast today. You know, like, is my hair right? And, you know, like, and all of the standards are coming from a Eurocentric, you know, ideal, right? Like, is she skinny? Well, this is a Eurocentric ideal because we know in the Black community, everybody ain't skinny, and everybody is, you know, people be like, yeah, fat ass is good. Like, they like it, you know, but now I'm in these Broadway rooms and I'm like, oh, am I skinny? You know, even in the ballet world, I'm already dealing with that. So, but I was not aware that when I got to Broadway, I was going to have to like maintain some ridiculous Eurocentric ideal of my body. That's the whole reason why I left the ballet world in some regards, is because the rigor of being Black, but then also trying to maintain these Eurocentric ideals. I was like, I don't know if I can continue to do this for my whole life. But again, if Dance Theater of Harlem, I just want to be clear, and what you're saying is true. If Dance Theater of Harlem hadn't folded, I would have stayed. Right. Because to date, I haven't done work that rigorous since then. You know, coming to Broadway it's challenged me in different ways because I've had to learn how to use my voice and I've had to develop my skill set. But in terms of the rigor of the work, that's, you know, don't mind me. People are calling me. I'm very important. But anywho, but to touch on what you were saying and how this goes into activism, what you're talking about is being in service to your art, right? Like we were taught how to be, and so like when you say that the celebrity is the art form, that means that me as the artist, I have to be in service to the art. You know, I'm not in service to myself. I'm not here because I want to be famous and look at me. It's like, no, look at the step. Look at the choreography. Let me be in service to the art, and also being in service to the art also means I'm in service to the other artists that I'm working with.
And Dionne, I'm gonna stop you there because I want you to tell us a little bit about what made you create such a wonderful organization and be co-founder of Broadway Serves. What was that for you?
So 2012, we all know what happened. Trayvon Martin was killed. And here's this little kid who could be our brother, our cousin, whoever, who's riding, walking through the neighborhood, he gets killed. And they don't arrest the guy who killed him. It's confusing. A month after that, they have the Million Hoodie March in New York, and across the country, this was happening. And I was there, Dana Marie Ingram, my other co-founder, and Kimberly Marable. We all showed up as individuals to make our voices heard, and basically do the protest, and we've all protested before. This isn't the first time I've been to a protest, but there was something different because this isn't the first time I've been to a protest. Amadou Diallo, Central Park 5, the list of names of people who have been murdered, of Black people, goes on. And so we were like, we need to actually do something. Like we have to do something about this. And so we decided that day, we decided, okay, we're gonna have a meeting. And within a week we had formed Broadway Serves, whose mission is to connect theater professionals to community service opportunities. And that component was so important to us because we recognize that on Broadway, we're so separate from the community at large, right? Like we go through our 8 shows a week and we kind of don't do anything else. Like you show up to the theater and then you go home and you rinse and repeat that cycle every day. But we're working in a community where Covenant House is right down the street. There's homelessness. It's terrible homelessness around Times Square area. And we're seeing all this every day as we're going to our very fancy and illustrious jobs. And so we were like, we can make a real impact here by being in these marginalized communities and bringing what we bring to these communities. And so we started doing a lot of outreach work. We started partnering with soup kitchens. We started partnering. The partnership that we have with Covenant House is incredible. We go there, we hold open mics twice a year. We work in their clothing closet. We have touring companies around the country going out doing community service wherever the city is. And one of the most important things that we are doing is working with the Broadway children to teach them early the value of community service and being in service to others. And so it just was a response to exactly to what we're seeing right now, right? And when we started it, you know, it was hard because we recognized that we weren't interested in the photo opportunity, right? We weren't interested in the step and repeat. And we recognize that in our community, most people want to do a benefit concert, something that kind of spotlights them. And the work that we do, we can't take a photo because some of these people have been trafficked. Some of these people are running from, you know, people, like we can't, these are marginalized communities. We can't exploit them in that way so that we can say, look at the good work we're doing. And so we recognize that that might deter people from participating because there's nothing glamorous about this. Like, but as we continue to do the work, we just stayed in there. We just stayed in there and we continued to do the work, and people started to really recognize the importance of the work we were doing. And, you know, the people that were right for this work, because everybody is not right for this work, you know, like I'm reluctant to point any fingers at anybody for what they are choosing to do or not to do at this time, because I recognize everyone doesn't have the heart for the work, nor the stamina for the work, because it's not something that happens for a season. This is work that has to happen forever, for your whole life. You know, and so that's what we're making a mission about. It's like, this is work that we're going to do every month of every year for as long as we can, you know, because the work is never ending. There's always somebody in need.
And I think that's a good place to close this little segment of it. And because I think what we're all discussing is a lifetime membership to work, and not work of labor and hard work. To me, from my perspective, and as it was taught to me, it is the labor of love. I love my world, my planet. Just to be clear for anybody who's watching, it's not just for Black people. We believe that arts changes people, and that is why we were doing it from the beginning. It's not just to edify Black people only. The edification of Black people then becomes the edification of all people, because the people become the most of these. So we bring Black people forward, and as we cannot get to equity until we get to repair the damage that is done to people under the back of white supremacy, and then we can get to equity, and then all people can be treated equally. And we use the art to do that. And the institutions that we've been involved in, all four of us on the screen before you, have made a point, a vested interest in continuing that work. The organizations that we spoke of, Philadelphia, Dance Theater Harlem, Lulu Washington, North Carolina A&T, as soon as these organizations had 50 cents, they were giving a quarter out to the community from which they came. It wasn't,
and never a whole dollar, never a whole dollar.
And first, I've talked about this quite a bit. In between semesters, I taught theater camp. My university has called it enrichment camp, and almost every college had a camp. Engineering had robot science. We had theater. We would have kids whose families couldn't afford it, and we started noticing the parents would say, "Well, Shaniqua ain't gonna be back next week. You know, budget's a little tight." What my professor and I decided to do was we told those parents, "Don't bring them to the drop-off point. Bring them directly to the classroom, and they're gonna get a scholarship." We wasn't losing no money. We wasn't coming off no money. We just walked them babies on in the classroom. And when I went that in the morning to get the snacks, I just got snacks for the kids that were under scholarship. Just like when I was growing up in elementary school, I was born in '79. So elementary school for me was the mid to late 80s. I had teachers like that supported everything that the students wanted to do. If you wanted to write, if you wanted to dance, if you want like whatever, and they supported the children on a human level, because my teachers had deodorant, they had hair brushes, they had oil for your hair, they had extra t-shirts and socks and stuff like that. A lot of my teachers took me to rehearsals, gave me $20 like for a haircut or whatever.
Yeah.
Everybody
was young.
Well, the whole idea of community was there. The whole idea of
that's the service. That's the service component of the art. That is the activism portion of the art, right? Like, is that you're in service not just to yourself, but also to other people, the young people that, you know, the lack of mentorship is, like it's important that we talk about that, you know, like we need to be mentoring this next generation.
We do.
So they don't have to show up into the room in the way that we might have shown up in the room, you know, especially in this world. I didn't have anybody welcome me in, you know, to the world.
Trying to change the room, the commitment to changing the room.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that I've heard recently is that when you're in the room on a mission. You're not there to soak up space for yourself. And I understand young people who came into a world where Dance Theater of Harlem already existed, where Alvin Ailey already existed, thinking these are things that just are, where Motown already existed. And what I've said to many young people who I said, I want you to consider a world where Motown didn't exist. To consider a world where Alvin Ailey didn't exist, where Dance Theater of Harlem didn't exist, where The Wiz did not exist. I want you to consider those worlds, because that is the world that's very easily we can go back to tomorrow.
And that's also the world that a lot of young kids in these communities that we are not talking about right now in this conversation about Broadway. These young kids that are in these communities, this is a world that they exist in. They don't know nothing about Broadway. They don't know nothing about Alvin Ailey. They can't afford the ticket admission price. And as we talk about what we're doing on Broadway, if we are not talking about those kids that can't afford to come here, who this is supposed to be all about, right? Like when we're building our Black selves and we're building a nation, right? If we don't talk about those very marginalized children that don't know nothing about what we're talking about, and nothing about this conversation is impacting them.
And then if we,
I have such a hard time. That's one of the reasons that I have such a hard time with the sort of the general scope. I love that there are different perspectives as far as Black arts and activism is on Broadway specifically, but that's the problem right there. That's the key part, is that it's trying to find the sustainability of our works and our actions beyond the stage, you know, and beyond Broadway and beyond the Tony and beyond the lights and the celebrity and the contract, you know, on television that happens because someone saw you.
How does this conversation, this very, in some ways, very privileged conversation that we're able to have, how does this impact the community at large?
Right. Absolutely.
That's my number one question as we're having this conversation, because what I'm not hearing anyone talk about is the National Black Theater or the Classical Theater of Harlem. I don't hear those names, those institutions that have dedicated, their mission is dedicated to the elevation of Black artists, and they are struggling because they do not have the support of the community. I don't hear their names being included in this conversation. So I feel like as we're having a conversation, if we aren't including these spaces, the Adelco Awards, if we are not including those spaces that have been created for our elevation, then the conversation is missing a very important component. And it's hard for me to figure out how the commitment level to elevation of Black artists.
Oh, Darell.
Yeah, for me, I keep revisiting in these conversations, I keep revisiting the places where people receive their training. Now, for the majority, people go to college or go to a school or something like that for the most part nowadays. But I was raised where the Black choir, community choir, would hear a 13-year-old girl at the talent show down to the middle school, and they'd be like, baby, come on to rehearsal. And that 13-year-old sings with them, and she learns her craft with those people. I remember reading the stories of Black celebrities, many of them that didn't go to college, but some of them were around like a Caramoo theater in Cleveland, and they saw those kids and they said, come on and take these acting classes down here at Caramoo, not at an institution, so they learn through Blackness. But when you look at the academy, these days, the majority of people that look like us that come to this city, especially for Broadway and stuff like that, or for dance or whatever, they are not educated in environments that teach them about Black and brown people. So the bar for them is always, not always, but for the majority, it's the commodification of art and their talent. And it's always they're looking to this person and that person versus, like we said, looking within. So if you're not teaching people as they develop their craft, what they consider, what looking for, when they get to the dog eat dog world of New York, LA, stuff like that, they're not rooted or grounded. Now, I won't say they're grounded in much. I was in a rehearsal for a reading for a friend of mine's MFA piece at NYU, and one of the young graduates from the NYU BFA program that was a part of the reading, one of the guys in the cast had a very deep voice. I was like, okay, Paul Robeson. And the majority of us were like, yeah, that's right. Oh my God, he does sound like Paul. This one beautiful, wonderfully talented Black young lady looked around and said, wait, who's Paul Robeson? And you could see, hear, feel, and taste the fact that she felt bad or embarrassed that she didn't know who Paul Robeson was. And I had some conversation with her on the side, full of grace and love, and I pulled daughter up. But if we're not visiting where people are learning their craft, and as Toni Morrison said, if you're not learning your craft through the centrality of your race, people are always going to hear the white man, the white
lens, the white gaze,
telling you how to do it.
The white gaze.
And to go back to, before we wrap up this part of it, one thing that Dionne, I absolutely agree with, and what we said in the very beginning, if we are not reaching back, we are not going to go forward. It's the bad, but so that takes us into our first question. Our first question here is, can Black arts or Black artists thrive without social political activism? Is it even possible? Even Marian Anderson couldn't escape it. And I'll just take that first question and say this: no. The reality of the situation is, if we are not pushing off the rigors of white supremacy, patriarchy, homophobia, sexism, then it all will encroach back, because if arts and commodity come together, the commodity is always going to win. And if the commodity in our society is, meaning the money, the commodification, the economics is always riding with popularity. Popularity is a majority rule system. So if we're on a majority rule system, then it is completely reasonable for a producer to say, I'm not producing that Black show because it's not going to bring as much money in, because it's not as popular, which goes back to why we have to rail against the idea that popularity and financial gain are the only winners. We have to center the art in the beginning, middle, and end of what we're doing. If we don't center the art as the celebrity, as the star, then we will always go to the popularity, and nothing that is not a cash cow at first glance will ever be. I'm sure nobody thought The Wiz, and The Wiz is still a critical failure in most aspects. The Wiz, the musical, never gets great critique, and The Wiz, the movie, never gets great critique. However, it is a cult classic and stands in a place of its own. So same thing. I mean, the only show that, and to be clear, there's a love affair with The Color Purple currently, but Jamal Story and I were in The Color Purple on Broadway and on the tour when it first started. There was no love affair.
No.
There was no such love affair going on. It's the same score and the same script, but there was no love affair.
And we had a few people who have gone through, who came through some, either the workshop or the work session or something, who did not know anything about Alice Walker, who had not read the book, who didn't know that it's one of the top 10 books by the Library of Congress that everybody should read. There are people who didn't know that. So I remember actually having a conversation with someone about the moment during that workshop when, into the room comes Alice Walker, and then into the room comes Valerie Simpson, and into the room comes Nick Ashford, and in comes Quincy Jones. And I remember having this conversation with this young Black artist, and this young Black artist didn't know those names. And understood. I should know those names. Mm-hmm. Alice Walker is the writer, right? And I'm going, you know, I mean, so it's true. And to that question, you know, about, you know, whether or not Black arts or artists can survive without socio-political activism. One of the things, piggybacking on what Brian said, the idea of history, what narrative, what story are we telling, right? I mean, you know, if nobody's interested in our story, or nobody knows it, or nobody cares, then it's not popular, and then, you know, nobody wants to tell it. So then we
also have to recognize that our Black people in general, can we even survive without it? You know,
right.
I mean,
right.
We can't, as Black people, I have to keep taking it back to the Black people who aren't in the arts. We can't survive without a focus on the socio-political aspect of life. We won't survive, because the system is built with us not in mind. Like, the system is built for our failure. Like, we were made in this country to build and work free. That was our indoctrination. That's what we've been doing. That's what the plan was originally. This that we're doing now was not a part of the American plan.
No.
And just like Broadway was not built to elevate my Black self. That was not how this was built. That was not the plan. And so we always have to work with that in mind. Otherwise, we won't survive as Black people or as Black artists.
And from a place of those of us who understand the commodification of talent and art and performance and stuff. Again, the more you know about history, the more you know about how you fit into the world, America, whatever. So in my theater history class, in my BFA program, which upon being in the real world, I have understood that the majority of Black actors trained in white environments have not had any of that conversation or that education. We learned about the Federal Theater Project, which was a part of the New Deal, which was a stimulus package. It was money that was given to the arts. If you could prove that you had been a practitioner, if you were an actor, if you were a set designer, if you were a costumer, you worked in makeup, whatever, there was money given under the New Deal for artists and performers, entertainers. Within that, there was a separate set of money for the Negro units. So that was the money that was given to Black artists. It was not as much, but it was money that was given to Black artists. So the regional theater movement was founded by the money from the Federal Theater Project. So they wanted theater throughout the nation. If you ever see an older theater that's a Black theater, like North Carolina Antiques Theater, it was originally named the Paul Robeson Little Theater. That's on the sign on the other side of the theater. They kept it up because it's a part of history. So if you don't understand that funding for Black art has always been second to and less than white art, you won't understand things like how the public has some of the deepest pockets in the artistic community of New York, and NBT is uptown working for every single nickel and every dime that they have. So like I said before, when you have more information, you can help conversations, you can help movements and works move faster. So you don't have to sit and twiddle your thumbs and say, oh my gosh, what's the problem with Black art organizations, yada, yada, yada. If you revisit August Wilson's Speaks to the Ground on Which I Stand, where he talked about, we don't particularly care about, we don't care about being written into a role or being a non-traditional casting. We just want the same money from tax dollars, not private funding or corporate funding. We want the same money from tax dollars because we all work, we all pay our taxes. We want the same money when we apply for it. If all of us, we know about grant applications with arts councils and all that kind of stuff like that, whether it's local level, national, we understand and we can look at statistics on who gets a coin from tax money and who doesn't. So again, when you know all of this information as a Black artist, it helps you deal just a little bit better. It doesn't erase the pain or the sting of it, but it helps you deal with it, and it helps you get up every day and take a deep breath and move forward.
And I think moving forward to the next question, I just to close that out, that segment about that, I really think it's imperative, and more than imperative, if you don't do this, nothing else will happen. If you don't understand that the arts is not the same thing as the job, if you don't make those things separate in your mind, heart, body, spirit, and soul, you will always be chasing it. I fully support changing the environments in which we work and fighting for them to be equitable. And I also fully support you cannot fight anything if you are unwilling to leave it.
Yes.
You
have to be ready to walk away. You have to be ready to walk away.
What are you leveraging if you're not willing to walk away?
Yeah, and that's scary. And I think the reason I want to say too, speaking of these nuances,
it's terrifying.
It is. One of the nuances too is that, and I don't want to speak for the people who don't come from the backgrounds that we do, particularly the concert dance background, which, you know, it's there's nothing glamorous about it. I mean, there's nothing, you're not making, you know, $2,000 a week or whatever the equity minimum is on, you know, to stand over there and do those steps, right? But the idea is when you are
black dance, did he say $2,000 a week and dance? Did he say that?
I might have. I don't know. I might have. but the thing is, if you came out of that and you are used to making your 10 cents a week because you really love what you do and you're really committed to teaching the generation behind you in the lecture demonstrations and the master classes, and then the school shows you're dancing for kids who are going to ask about all of this and they look like you, and if this is what you're doing, then when you do get to a job where you are making equity minimum and you see that, and it's a workshop or something like that, and you see that things aren't going the way that they should as they pertain to your blackness, it is a little easier to walk away.
Well,
for me, it is a little easier because my entire training, as we referenced at the very beginning of this conversation, my entire training and way of being was not just about these steps. It was about the craft. It was about the civic responsibility. It was about the duty. It was about the information. It was about the practice. And it was about you as a Black person in the context of all of that and society, right? So the thing is, it's harder to do it and not walk away when you have all of that going on.
And I do want to say, I want to give a shout out to some organizations that still do the work. We have Deep Rooted Dance Theater Chicago. We have Earl Mosley Institute of the Arts, Diversity of Dance in New York City and all over the tri-state area. Earl Mosley, who we have all touched base with, and Dionne has seen us dance with, and Darell has seen us dance with. Jamal and I are members. I'm on the board. That Earl Mosley would have a football field of young Black kids dancing if he could make it happen. He constantly stresses the board out by saying, we have to have more scholarship. Oh, I got 5 more kids to come on in here. One of my favorite parts of the Alvin Ailey organization is the Ailey Camp, which I work with Tyrone Ankin in Kansas City, Missouri, where that is dedicated to the edification of young Black kids and bringing art as a catalyst for critical thought and self-empowerment, not just the idea of creating a great aesthetic. It's a partnership that has a great aesthetic. And with that being said, I'm going to ask this next question. We got 2 more questions I'm going to ask tonight before we close out. What happens when the Black organizations you represent shy away from activism, especially in 2020, COVID, Black Lives Matter Society, Carmen Jones asked, and I'll start this off with this. If you do not unlearn white supremacy that goes for an individual and an organization, you will repeat it. And white supremacy, to be clear, is not about whiteness as in terms of skin color. It's about the idea of better than this and needing to be something else other than yourself in order to succeed. Not your.
You don't have to be white to participate in white supremacy.
No, and you're taught white supremacy. So what that looks like when you don't take the color out of it is you're going to chase the more of it all. You're going to chase. I have a wonderful home. I have a wonderful space. It is not enough. I need more. You're going to chase. I can afford to pay 10 dancers. Well, you're going to chase. I need 25 dancers. Instead of saying I can afford to pay 10 dancers well and create good work, and I can have these choreographers that are less known and do it in this theater and they made the Apollo and Aaron Davis Hall. You're going to chase. I have to be at City Center, and I have to be at the Joyce, and I have to have a full season. Those things cost money. As you break those costs up, you're going to have to interact with people that they may not be for the education of Black people. So that director of, if I have the Brian Brooks Dance Company, the Brian Harlan Brooks Dance Company and I say, you know what, I want to be at the best theater there is. I want to be at the Met and I want to be there next year. So then I'm going to have to partner with money people.
Sure.
Those money people, because let's not forget, one of the theaters in the Met is the Coke Theater.
Mhm.
Okay,
That's
so
nice.
I'm gonna just leave that right there.
KLCH, everybody, KLCH.
It's
Coke.
the Coke Theater, right?
Those people.
Who's sponsored by the Koch brothers. So,
Mm-hmm.
so think about this, Carmen. How might my ability to speak to Black Lives Matter be marginalized if I want to be in that theater? Again, organization that wants to be for the edification of Black people can only be so if they're willing to walk away from things that are not in partnership with the edification. And I am not arrogant enough to say that if I had a company, I would do A, B, and C, because I don't have a company, partially for that reason, right?
Yeah.
That partnership, I haven't figured out intellectually, how will I navigate that? I barely figure out how to navigate Broadway, because my expectation, I mean, there was something that came out last week, a few weeks ago, about a group of theater owners and how some of them were Trump supporters. And all four of us that talked about this, we were like, yeah.
That's what I had assumed.
Par for the course.
No surprise.
People were surprised by that. And I said, if it's the 1%, and I'm walking onto somebody's home that has a compound over there and a compound over there and a kitchen that's bigger than my actual house, I'm going to assume, and probably people don't like you to assume, but I'm going to assume for my own safety that these people have some connections to political entities that may not be for the edification of Black people. So what I would suggest for you, Carmen, is to just understand that you have the autonomy within you. So if you don't have it yet, build your life so that you constantly are making the things that you're a part of become a part of you, so they make you better, so that you're able to walk away, as opposed to you being a part of it and it becoming part of your identity, and now you have no ability to extradite yourself from said organization. Go, Darell.
And then we also, as you said a number of times.
I like that.
As you said a number of times, we have to define what enough is, and we have to define how content we are with the progress that we're making from one glory to the next. If you are able to save 5 kids in your lifetime, that's amazing. If you're able to save 50, that's amazing too. So a lot of people don't understand how they should measure what they're doing. If you are an artistic director of a company and you have your sights on the commercial bigness of things, if you have your sights on Lincoln Center, but you don't understand the difference between an artistic director and an executive director, if you don't understand what it is to have a person who's over audience development, someone who's over development in general, how to raise funds and funding, if you don't have someone within your reach that's a grant writer, then you actually don't have your eye on that big place. You don't have your eye on Lincoln Center. And a lot of people don't understand that as you grow and get bigger, that means it's a bigger team. A lot of people don't understand that the artistic director will say, oh my gosh, let's do Jelly's Last Jam next year. The executive director will say, ooh, that's a big cast. Let's sit down and talk about it because it's going to cost X amount of dollars. So a lot of times people don't have the information of like, how much do I have to shoulder up to get to these places? And when you understand how all of those things work together, you can say, oh my gosh, I literally have worked for arts organizations who have jumped and screamed when they got an email for someone who was going to underwrite the printing of the programs for their first show of the season. That's not a lot of money if we want to look at it from a capitalist perspective. But when you have that off your back, you can say, oh my God, we got the programs printed. That's great. And there are like companies will tell you what $50 will do for them, what $100 will do for them. So again, the more information you have, the more you can work and the faster you can run. So going back to that question, if you see the organization are shying away from it, especially if you've been supporting them with your dollar, your voice, and your presence, you can ask them why.
Yeah, all of these are reasons too that I was not thrilled immediately about the idea, this sort of petition for the Apollo to become a Broadway theater. This is all of this portion of the conversation. Dionne and I had talked about this. I was not a fan of it because my initial thought was the Apollo is a landmark juggernaut. It's an institution in and of itself, known throughout the world for its history, for its art, for the presentation of that art, for the presentation of Black people in the context of art for all these years. And so why would it want to be a part? Why do we want it to be a part of a world that is clearly not ready, not about us? I didn't understand why that was the thing.
I think that takes it full circle. Jamal, I think that takes it full circle because we have to move from the spirit of enough. There is no single theater in New York City that is as famous as the Apollo Theater.
Not one. Not one.
People travel from all over just to come to the Apollo. They may stay at the Gansevoort downtown, but they get on that train and come right up to see the Apollo.
They sure do.
More to the point, the Apollo is able to do shows, one of which I choreographed, the first Noel, is able to do shows that are about and for the edification of Black people, that don't have the overhead of a Broadway theater, that don't have the specter of a Koch brother telling them they can't do it, that are able to do what they want to do, able to have new singers, people that we know and love and care about, come and do shows in the Apollo Cafe, because they can pick and tailor their program for the reason the entire building was started.
All for an affordable price of admission.
Right. If the Apollo becomes Broadway theater, part of that will inevitably be lost.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, because it will be absorbed into the institution of supremacy that is already present, that is clearly present, and that sort of precipitated all of these different responses from Black people working in it. You know, all of these different groups are a result of the institutional problem that Broadway has.
Right.
And for me, the question of it, the Apollo being a Broadway theater, I asked some people, I said, what is that going to do for the community of Harlem? And are you asking this just so that you can have a job when things open back up? So are you looking at yourself and what you want for you? Or are you specifically what are they going to erase as far as like the connection with the community of Harlem? What are they going to erase, or what's going to have to take a back seat if this becomes a Broadway theater? It has to apply with actors' equity, that has to comply with the theater wing, that has to do all of those things. What is the point? It's a question, but I don't see the validity of it when you look at what you said, Brian, the weight of what the Apollo is.
Right.
And also,
compliance and obedience.
And I also want to say we can have more than one thing. Like, we have to get out of this mindset of like the first Black astronaut, the first Black chef. Like, we could have 3, 4, 5, 15 theaters if we got our mind right and we made building nation a part of our like default setting. Like, if
we can have Gabby Douglas and Simone Biles.
Right, like if we made that a part of our default setting, that the expectation is not that we'll have one, the expectation is that we'll have 5, 10, 15. Like, that's what we're working towards. And we're not gonna take one space and ask that one space that we have right now to then couple up with whiteness for the purpose of you having a job on Broadway and not having to deal with white people. Like, this doesn't, I don't understand why they would want to come to the table. And no one asked them. They didn't. That petition wasn't even written by the owners of the Apollo, which was even more confusing.
Right.
It was like, this
that's disconcerting
from them.
Well, it's also, I think what you hit on just then, and I kind of want to bring it to a close on this, is the danger of the single story. The idea that we can only have Misty Copeland, and the idea that we should be bent over with gratitude because the white organization that has been white for as many years as it's been white has now accepted the first Black. Let me say this, and let it be said forever. If I am the first Black anything, it's not because I was the first most qualified Black to stand up there and be auditioned for.
Correct.
Someone
Correct.
else turned down. So when someone allows me, because they decide to stop being racist that week, to be the first Black whatever, first Black thing I am, it is their privilege that I even want to be bothered with it.
Yeah.
It is the privilege of American Ballet Theater that Misty Copeland even cares about being the first Black, what is she, a principal? The first Black principal. The fact that she even cares about that. The fact that Brittany even cared about being the first cover in Wicked for that. I want all of us. If that's what Misty wants, I support it with all of my heart. If that was Brittany wants, I support it with all of my heart. But let's be clear, it's Wicked's privilege. Yes. Let's be clear, it's their privilege to have because we could all go, oh, knock on that door. We don't want y'all here. And then we could turn around and walk away. When you turn around and walk away, and then these institutions now, and if maybe I'll write this at some point, but if I had my druthers, at the point where they decide to stop being racist and they open their doors, no one would be standing there.
Well, exactly.
No. Right.
Ooh,
that part.
From the situation.
Could you imagine? But can you actually imagine if, and I'm not saying that I don't want integrated systems. I think that that's wonderful. I think that I work with a Broadway producer who is working very diligently with his organization to change the scope of his organization. He is looking at, he understands clearly, Stephen Gabriel has said to me, he understands clearly that it's not just enough to be open to having Black voices. You're gonna have to pursue this, which is exactly what Black organizations had to do. I can't just put my shingle up and have a Black dance school. I have to go pursue, as you said, Dionne, those Black kids who have never even heard of this opportunity. I have to go pursue that because that opportunity is being shielded from their eyes because they are at the business of survival. And so just bringing it to a close, I just want to say that when we are privileged enough to be done with the business of survival, it is our duty, I believe, to make sure that those that are stuck with the business of survival can come up with us. And you don't have to bring 5 up. Dionne, I gave you credit for this. We said this a couple of weeks ago on our first show. You don't have to put the pedal to the metal to 100 miles an hour for the rest of your life, become a Black activist, grow locks down your back, wear an ankh around your neck, burn sage every week. Just be at a 40% press on it. You want to be on, great. You want a Tony Award, fantastic. But after you get your Tony Award or your Oscar or your EGOT, spend 40% of your time talking about Black people. Whoopi Goldberg does a lot, but do as much as she does when she speaks on the show. She's an EGOT, right? Yeah. And I don't always agree with Whoopi Goldberg, and I don't think that's the requirement. The requirement is that she speaks about Black people and speaks about Black women regularly. Regularly.
Yeah, she makes it a part of her work. She integrates it into the work, which takes it right back to the very beginning of the conversation, which is about the idea of making sure that the training and all of those things are that the amalgam includes all of it. It includes that as part of the work. That part is as important as the tendu, as important as the note at the center of the pitch. It's all part of the thing. It has to all be part of the operational thing that is your career, your momentum, your art, your craft, your practice.
Absolutely. We could take 10 more minutes, and I just want to put this question on the floor.
Oh dear, I'm nervous. Let me grab my popcorn.
So
we can listen to this cough.
There was a young man, and he wrote a dossier. He wrote a little statement that said, "Will you see us?" And one of the things that struck me about it, all of you can go look it up on Instagram if you want. I won't read the whole thing because I haven't read anybody's whole thing. So in fairness, I won't read his in total.
Honey, brevity.
What I do know is this: if we are chasing white supremacy, the behaviors of that supremacy will be part of how we see moving forward. It is important that we throw, I think, it's important that we throw off the idea of respectability and hierarchy within our behavior towards one another. And it'll even free us up to have the more salient and truthful conversations when we are interacting with circumstances and situations that are problematic. I know for a fact that no person that I've had racist or microaggressions with that has been in my purview for more than a day has walked away from the interaction with me not knowing that information. I know telling them that put me in jeopardy, put my job in jeopardy. I know that that persona, that idea has kept me out of some Black institutions and some white institutions. However, that was more important to me at the time. Do you all think there's a conversation to be had about, and let me be clear, respectability. And people that don't know, that doesn't mean not being respectable. That means the politics of, in order to have equal opportunity, I must, in order to survive, I must comb my hair. I must pull my pants up and, I don't know, wear a tie. Not that you have to wear, not that you don't want to be dressed appropriate for what it is that you're doing. Or is the idea that the respectability politic is going to make you more important and better as a person. And that idea keeps you from speaking truth to power. And what's needed to be done is to speak truth to the power in yourself so that you can speak truth to the power in others. And I know that in our own community, once we get into these systems of white supremacy, we are fearful. We walk around with a lot of fear of being kicked out of it as quickly as you were in it, which creates some of those same behaviors within our own community. Do you guys see that those behaviors with inside dance, theater, and Broadway community?
Yes. Can I go first?
Go for it.
So, Darell, you cannot go first. We're going to start with Jamal, and then we're going to go back to Dionne. No, yes, we're going to start with Dionne. Then we're going to go to Jamal, and you're going to be last. Go, Dionne.
You know, absolutely. I think, especially the young man that you're speaking about, particularly, is a younger member of this community. And I think so frequently, you know, the younger members of this community, they haven't been mentored into the community. And so they don't know about the pitfalls in the community. And so when they do speak out, when they do let their voices be heard, they're so frequently silenced by the people that they respect, by the brown and Black people in this community, because that's not how we do it. I had a woman show up in my mentions one day. I had spoken out about the young man that committed suicide in Chicago. Now I'm not gonna call this woman's name because she's a very prominent figure in this community, you know, so out of respect for her, I won't call her to the carpet. However, I thought in my mind that I am speaking on behalf of a member of our community. You know, this is something that a lot of people have dealt with, wanting to kill themselves because somebody has said something to them or made them feel a way. And I spoke out about it, and this woman jumped into my comments and basically told me that this was not the appropriate way in which to speak about this thing, that I should be very careful because my career could end before it even gets started. Now, when this comment came into my mentions, I was 38. Okay, so that was 2 years ago. So I've been here for 18 years. This woman is telling me that this is not how it's done. This is a Black woman in my mentions telling me that this is not the appropriate, respectable way in which to have this conversation. And I want to get on the platform first before I say anything. And I had to swiftly remind this woman that I'm not concerned about how these white people may perceive what it is that I'm saying, because I know already I've already been trained how to speak truth to power in every circumstance, right? Like that was a part of my training at Dance Theater of Harlem. But the reason why so many of these young kids don't speak up like this young man is because there's someone who looks like you ready to tell you that this is not how we do it on Broadway.
Right.
You know,
go
and
respectability.
Go with the, like, I have had so many people in this business, brown people, Black people, who have told me to go with the flow to get what I want. That could mean that means when the producer is sexually advancing on me, go with the flow to get what I want. I don't want whatever you think I want, like this Tony Award or this show or whatever you think I want so badly. I don't want it as badly as I want my dignity. And so I'm going to speak on behalf of other people, but that's what I was trained to do. And unfortunately, we do work in a system where people enjoy the comforts of their proximity to whiteness because it's very comfortable. The table is made, the legs aren't wobbly, you know, chicken might be bland, but you know, we'll talk about that later. But all in all, the table has been created. What we're talking about is like, no, sometimes you have to pick up the hammer and create the table. That means sometimes I have to walk away from the table that's already made because I'm just standing at the table. I don't even have a seat at the table. But if I remain respectable, maybe you'll let me stand here. Maybe you'll let me stand here. But maybe you, but it's too risky because maybe you won't. Maybe I won't be able to just stand here. And I'm not looking to stand. I'm looking to be able to sit down and build something, right? And so I think we have to be really careful about what it is that we're asking from this moment. Because if I have to be respectable and I have to be appropriate in order to have dignity, I don't want it. Because I should receive that just by simple virtue of me being alive and a human. I shouldn't have to tap dance. And it doesn't matter how well I tap dance or sing or do any of these things. You're still not going to value me. I'm still not going to be able to be my authentic self. So am I going to go through my whole life doing this? This is a 60-year-old woman that's approaching me in this way, who still feels like she has to silence herself about injustices happening in our community. Do you think that's what I want for my life?
Well, I think that's a great moment to move to Jamal. And Jamal, what were you going to say there?
So for me, it's a lot. I agree with everything that Dionne just said, and we got to see it. Dionne and I were dance captains with you as associate choreographer at Motown. So in building that show, we were in a space of privilege because from the standpoint that we were a Black room, but we also understood that there were, in addition to the Black person, Berry Gordy, who was putting all this together, putting all this up, there was still a white Broadway structure that this was all going to go inside of. The thing I think about with respectability, first of all, just a note on respectability politics, the whole idea of it is difficult. And I think a lot of us in our generation, the generation of the people right here in this roundtable, have dealt with a reckoning, a sort of reconsideration of what those things meant, because we grew up in an era where that's where respectability politics prevailed. You got your education, you went to school, you went to college, you did pull your pants up. You weren't like those other Negroes over there, right? You did everything that you were supposed to do, and then you spoke a certain way, and your subject-verb agreement was on point all the time. And we're not even really doing the code switching thing because there's only one code, right? So, and then we get into a space where we're now all of the stuff has sort of gotten unpacked, and now we get it. Now we go, oh, okay, that was all put up on us. The respectability thing, that's all a part of white systemic racism too. The thought process that creates respectability politics is coming straight from white male patriarchy. So then that's when you get into sort of the criminalization of drugs and entire cultures in the Caribbean for drug usage, so that we can populate the prisons
throw people away.
Industrial complex.
And you throw people away. Now, before we get to you, Darell, before we get to Darell.
Well, oh no, I wasn't. Wait, no, I hadn't answered the question. I was just saying that was the note on respectability politics, because I already know where Darell is going. So that was the note on that. So I say all of that to say that we have had to deal with all of that, right? And then so to this kid, I mean, it's a grown man, but the one that you're referencing, I did read what he had to say, and my heart went out to him from the standpoint that also I don't know if he had what we had growing up, where you had a sort of solid sense of self as an artist before you walk into the room, right? So that even though you're being measured against other people, you know your strengths, you know your weaknesses, but you know that you've done the work. So you deserve to be in the space, right? When you're starting on Broadway, at least this is what I've seen, I've seen a lot of people get to Broadway and they're overwhelmed. So all of the self-esteem starts to retreat a little bit. There's a little rescission going on, right? And then so you're overwhelmed with, I'm in the room, I don't know if I'm good enough anymore. I might be. I'm over there next to that other Black person who's been to, auditions for the past 6 years, and is doing the thing. And I don't even know. I don't know if I fit in, if I'm there. And so that combined with a responsibility on some level to do what all of us have done and suggest, which is we got to be willing to walk away. The symmetry or the balance in that is sort of paralyzing, I find, for a lot of young artists, young Black artists coming to it, because at the end of the day, and at the beginning of it too, it's still a job, right? So it's corporate art. There's still the corporate part. There's still the part that has to do with what you're doing with your business, right? You have to pay bills. You have to build this resume. All of that is part of the thing, in the same way that you would do it in corporate America. The cloak and the clothing of racism is just different over there, but it's the same idea. So my heart goes out to him, because what he's looking for is for us. And going back to Dionne's mentorship point earlier, he's looking for us to help to sort of find ways with our privilege, first of all, and to help. And part of that reach back includes an understanding that there is privilege. We have to know that that's what we have. And that's part of the thing that is difficult and sort of insidious inside of all of these protests and things that are going on from our Black community, the Black voices, is that we have to keep in the forefront of all of that the level of privilege that we have. Tanya Pinkin's letter, I didn't disagree with what she said, but what was interesting is the degree to which her level of privilege, the privilege that she actually identified and acknowledged in the letter, undermines some of the points that she was making about what ought to happen and how we ought to be approaching it, So, I mean, that's I think that keeping privilege in the forefront, the understanding, the acknowledgement of it, is part of what would help this kid and this movement.
And go ahead, Darell. Welcome.
Dr. I would just say, when I read what he talked about, I gave it all of the validity in the world, because I have known that feeling. There was a concert at the W a few years back. I ain't gonna call no names. There was a concert at the W, and this was around the time where a lot of my exposure and connections to social media is rooted to a Soul Train video that I did, where I was just narrating the Soul Train line. And in that commentary, I said, it just popped out of my mouth because it's true in my life experience. I said, you can't outdo Black people. And at the time, it was growing. I had T-shirts and other stuff that I was selling. And we were taking a picture after this concert at the W. It was a Black person's concert. And what specific, we were in a group, and one of my sisters said, you can't outdo. And the crowd said, that it was like 15 of us in the picture. And they said, Black people, except for a few Negroes. They literally were like, ooh, I want to work. They literally said that, not knowing that I was the person who started that hashtag situation. Like, you cannot. They didn't know who I was. And I have been in rooms where people have not been welcoming to me until they knew that I was y'all's friends, or they knew who I had proximity to, or once they knew whose house I was over, or once they knew who I was. Oh, what you doing? What now? What you doing next week? Oh, y'all gonna have an audience. So I knew exactly how that young man felt. I remember to this day the people that didn't really speak to me or say anything to me when I first got to New York, because I wasn't in the show. They had never heard me sing. They didn't know what I did. And these were people that I was like, okay, we in a room full of Black people. Okay, come on, skin folk. And I was like, oh, that ain't what it is. And then I started to learn, this is why they went to school. This is how they taught them. This is what they appreciate. This is what they validate. Jamal! And so when I read what that young man was talking about, I understood what he was talking about. And I also understood the amount of work that is going to have to go into helping Black people of privilege and amazing talent and amazing access, helping them unlearn all of the anti-Blackness that they've sat under. It was a few weeks ago, I sat and had a phone conversation with a Black artist here in the New York Broadway community. I had a phone conversation with him about how he's perceived and about how his choices and how he goes about his work, how that is what is separating him from other members of the Black community. A lot of people would not have had the patience or I mean, even like the temerity to have a conversation with him and say, honey, this is why you're being treated like you're being treated. And I did not approach it from the place of my personal opinion. I approached it from the place of Black art history. I approached it from the place of analyzation of text. It was not a me and him situation. It was the history of who we are and how we fit into this landscape, and how a lot of what his work is doing negates that, and it excludes Black people. And so I felt that young man because I've been in his shoes.
I think that as we go through all of these moments, I think what's important is to reiterate the danger of the single story. We are not a monolith, and we never will be.
No.
The reality of the situation is that we have to be able to come forward with our individual weight, and the only thing that we actually have is the camaraderie of our history under our skin color. The reality of the situation is whiteness was something that people just made up. And then they decided Blackness was made up. And then Blackness created a culture out of the business of surviving in spite of the design of us not to survive. And all the other cultures that are under the specter of whiteness, because whiteness in and of itself, there is never anyone that will ever be white enough. Even if all of people with brown melanin in their skin disappear tomorrow, there will be disparity between people who we now identify as white, because we have Ireland and we have England and we have Scotland and we have Sweden. And with all of that, there's going to be all of that disparity of wealth and privilege and resource within that. And I think
oppression is about the appropriation of survival. Absolutely.
Exactly. I think in conclusion, for tonight, I think what's really important is that everybody, it's going to take a Black Leader United, it's going to take a When We See You, it's going to take a When You See Us, it's going to take inside conversations, it's going to take outside conversations, it's going to take showing up as you truly are fully in the room. We cannot go back to being in rooms where you are not speaking truth to the power and presence of who you are. If you're not speaking truth, you're not able to come forward, and you're not able to give a full understanding and change the world as it is, no matter what initiative it is.
Right.
If it exists and we're still silent in the rooms, and we're still, and then keeping in mind, if no one has to do it. Here's the thing. It reminds me of Naomi Campbell and Tyra Banks. Naomi Campbell was a supermodel and Tyra Banks came along. Tyra had expectations of Naomi's tutelage and then was very hurt because she didn't receive it, not realizing that Naomi Campbell at the time was going through a whole community of stress and oppression and difficulty under the specter of white supremacy. So it crippled Naomi Campbell's ability to be the mentor, the first person there, the person to look out for her. So now that we're having this COVID-19 where Broadway is shut down and these businesses are shut down and they're having to really rethink who they are, we're under the specter of one of the worst presidential administrations ever to be known and under a pandemic. It now is the best time that I can think of to take the revolutionary idea that we were all born with and spread it out and allow, and also while allowing people to be individuals. If you're not about that fight, you don't have to be about that fight. But here's my thing: don't get in the way.
That part.
And in reference to all of that, the requirement of this work, I want to quote one of the most amazing women of the civil rights movement. She started the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee because she knew that young activists needed help with understanding organization, with dealing with their emotions and their anger and their rage. Ella Baker said, "We who believe in freedom cannot rest until this happens." She said, "I'm going to keep getting up every day, tired."
But Darell, you got to say that. Say that again. We that believe in freedom, what?
We who believe in freedom cannot rest until this happens.
Yeah.
And Jamal, what are your closing words for tonight?
Oh God.
That's good. move on.
That's good.
No, you know what? I would just say to reiterate that oppression doesn't work without the appropriation of survival, and in this case, it's ours. It's our survival. It's our survival in all of these different contexts, on Broadway, off Broadway, in dance companies, you know, wherever it is. It's the same thing. It's not a new story. And I would just urge everybody watching, particularly the people who are not artists, who are working in corporate America or at Walmart or at the hospital, wherever, to understand and embrace the idea that it's not entirely different, that the things that we're struggling for and working for, and that these organizations are after in a context, as much as there's a certain level of privilege there, the root of it, the very, very, very deep dug part, is exactly the same.
Dionne, before I let you take us on out of here, I'm going to say one thing. Tonight, we spoke of a lot of organizations, Black Theater United, When We See You, White American Theater. We talked about the NAACP. We talked about many organizations throughout history and time and infinitum that have been about this work. This work will not be done in a day, and no organization, person, or statement will be perfect on its inception. These things will continue to change and grow. Tonight, we have redacted quite a few names from the conversations that we've had. I'll tell you why we redacted those names. Because we want to talk about the concepts, because these concepts forego an individual. The reason we started the show at the beginning of our careers and went forward is because the concept is consistent. However, if you want change in your life, in the circumstances you're in, you cannot afford to redact the names from the people that you are speaking to. If you are speaking to someone about something that has happened to you, and you want that thing to change, you have to speak the name, the situation, and circumstance, and stand grounded in that fact. You cannot stand grounded if you are not able to say the name of the person who has oppressed you. And if you're not ready, take your time. Connect with people who have your back. There are people.
Call us.
Many of us, if we can't do it, we might know someone who can. There are people that want to stand with you, but you cannot do this work in anonymity. You cannot.
Or you can just have a moment with one of us just to practice telling your story.
Tell your story. That goes for when we know that. What's the move? Me Too is so strong because it has voices, people, faces, places, and things. And sometimes for legal reasons, you have to redact things. And I understand.
Yes.
But in order to change things directly, the reason Broadway theater and these businesses are speaking out is because they've been called by name.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have to call.
You have to tell your story.
And at the bottom line, you have to say it when you're in the room. When you're in the room where it happens, you have to speak up. Dionne, take us on out of here. What's your last words?
I just want to encourage everyone who has decided to step into this moment and to become a part of this movement to remember that it requires stamina. You know, like this is not something that is going to happen this season and it's going to be gone next season. This is something that we have to make a part of our regular operating system. You have to have stamina for this work. You have to have stamina to stand up against oppression all the time. So if you fall one day, don't worry, you can stand up again. You can stand up, but you just recognize that once you start to stand up and you start to crawl and then you're walking and then you're running, you're gonna be in that race forever. That is that is what the work requires. It requires all of us to develop the stamina to beat the oppressor because they've been doing this. They have the stamina for it. We see it with our own eyes. We can't protest on Tuesday and then stop protesting on Thursday because we got to go back to work. You know, like you have to make your life, you have to make this your life's work about, you know, what Brian is saying is so true. It's like, we have to speak the truth to the power in the moment. You know, we can't afford, we have to get people who have been oppressing us really comfortable with who we actually are. Not the idea that we got them accustomed to, and recognize that we've been indoctrinated to take care of white people as a matter of our survival. Okay, there was a time when this conversation could not happen without someone showing up at my door. So we have to recognize that we have come from that place to this place. And now it is the time for us to always speak the truth in the moment so that the next generation doesn't have to do this part. Their struggle will be different. Let's do this part. Let's start getting people really comfy cozy with our Blackness so that when the next generation comes up, they don't have to do this. We have to have the stamina.
Exactly.
We can't, 40 miles per hour, not 100
40.
and a 0. 40.
Right.
Stay right there. Because we're just like this in the movement. But you're not ready to start and stop, and people are still dying. And the most marginal, we have to always keep our focus on the most marginalized people in our community. And Broadway, let's just be clear, that ain't us. That's not us. There are people
if you get the 0 on the freeway,
we have to remember the dying people as we are in this movement. And we can do two things at the same time. We can sit in private and we can start building and making an infrastructure that benefits us on Broadway. But right in this moment, the dying people, those are the most important people.
Right.
The most marginalized amongst us, we have to lift them up. Otherwise, this movement has no bearing.
Right.
Killers are still at large.
That part.
They are.
So thank you, everybody. This has been our 4th episode of Beyond the Thread. Dionne graced us with her presence. There will be more in the community. I can't wait till we all can commiserate in person and do this for real in person.
Yes.
In the meantime, here we are. Thank you, Jamal Story. Thank you, Darell J. Hunt. And thank you, Dionne Figgins. Shout out to the director. He doesn't want to come on camera. Johan Nigel Thomas Brooks. My husband is over there. Over there. So I'm shouting out to him he does our commercials. He does all of our media at this moment. It's, it's each one, teach one, build one up, and we'll see what happens next. Jamal, are we going to be able to get off successfully tonight?
Today, I'm going to take us off successfully. Just give us one moment. Give me 1 second.
Right.
Hold on. Wait a minute. Here we go. All right.